Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris, and today we're going to continue our look at Romans chapter 15, verses 7 down through 13. Paul had been talking about the issue of whether or not it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to an idol. Some in the church said you could, some in the church said you could not. And in the middle of that discussion, Paul says Jesus is the fulfillment of promises that God made. He made them to both Jews and Gentiles. Great answer, has nothing to do with eating meat sacrificed to idols. So, what was going on here? Well, you might be thinking, Paul simply started a new section. We've been in our Sunday morning studies in the book of First Corinthians for some time now. And in that book, it's very obvious. It's broken into sections. Paul is addressing this problem, then he moves on to this problem, then he moves on to this problem. Could that be what he's doing here in his letter to the Roman church? Because that does happen. There are places where Paul just shifts topics. That's a good answer as to why he shifts the topic here. Except the more you study the passage, you realize he doesn't. That's not what's going on here. Believe it or not, this is still about the issue of eating meat. Okay, well, then maybe meat has some deeper theological consequences, and we have to study it. Could it be that meat is a symbol for something? Meat doesn't mean meat necessarily. He's not talking about some slab of roast beef that somebody sacrificed to some weird pagan idol. It's a symbol for something deeper. And we need to know how to interpret these symbols. And my answer to that is, I don't know. I never catch symbolism. You have to hit me over the head and be real obvious with me. I don't get symbolism. When somebody says, oh, in this movie, the color orange, that symbolizes death. Ah, how did you get that? Unless somebody comes out and says, hey, here's an orange, it symbolizes death, I'm not going to get that. I don't think that's what Paul was doing here. I don't think there's any symbolism. And I don't think the bigger issue here was something beyond meat. Let me rephrase that. That was a badly phrased sentence. I think there is something bigger here. I think, yes, there's the issue of can we eat this meat or can't we eat this meat, but there's something else going on, and it's something the people were forgetting. And when we see that Paul brings up, hey, Jesus was the fulfillment of all these promises, I think it's meant to show the people, here's what you were forgetting. So what was it? Well, if we look at verse 13, Paul wishes them peace, and that's significant. Where did verse 13 go? Here we go. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. He wishes them peace. All right? But where does he say that peace comes from? If we find that out, we're going to start to see how this fits together. Well, obviously, the peace comes from knowing what God did for us. What did he do for us? Well, he sent Jesus. Well, yeah, but for the Jews, yes. Also for the Gentiles, he sent Jesus for all people. Jews and Gentiles can know peace through Jesus. Okay, so what does that have to do with meat? Well, these lines of whether or not to eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols, they were starting to break down over lines of Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. And pretty soon it was, hey, you guys aren't real Christians because you're eating meat. We Jewish Christians know how to come to God. You've got to be like us. And the Gentiles are going, well, actually, you need to lighten up and be like us. Once again, those divisions between Jew and Gentile were starting to pop up. So Jesus, Paul has reminded them, came as a fulfillment of the promises made to the patriarchs, to the Jews, but he also came as a fulfillment to promises made to Gentiles. You see, Jesus brought you together, and now you're letting hamburger separate you? Really? Paul is asking them to focus on the things that unite them, not the things that divide them. Now let's go all the way back to the start of the section. Let's look at verse 7 here. Verse 7 says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. Accept one another as Jesus accepted you. You were accepted by Jesus. So the person that you are rejecting now, because he doesn't eat meat or he does eat meat, is also somebody who was accepted by Jesus. And you're rejecting somebody that Jesus accepted, really? Remember, the entire story of the Bible is how mankind was cut off from God because of our sin, and it's Jesus who brought us back. That's the story. Jesus bought us back. He bought them back. He brings everybody back. He gives everybody a chance. So stop telling people that they are not right with God because they're not being a Christian the way that you are a Christian. Rather than focusing on the story of how Jesus reconciled us all, the Romans were pointing fingers at each other and deciding who is and who isn't a real Christian, all over the issue of what to have for dinner. Seriously? Now, here's another aspect to it. After everything God has done for us, after the sacrifices he made for us, how do you think this kind of petty squabbling goes over with him? I remember years ago, we took our boys to Washington, D.C. We spent like a week there. We toured all the monuments, all the museums. It was awesome. And we got this money because Deb had been putting aside money from her job for a couple years. You know, she would just designate, I'm going to put this much aside every week. And after a couple of years, she had enough for us to fly there, for us to stay there, for us to have meals and what have you. She sacrificed a lot for that trip. And one day, it was kind of hot, it was humid. You do a lot of walking in Washington, D.C., and our boys were just being grumpy. They were just, you know, just picking at each other and arguing and complaining about everything. They were not fun to be around. So I told Deb, I said, hey, there was a Starbucks back there. Why don't you go get yourself some coffee? Oh, she says, I could use one. So she went off. The second she was out of earshot, I turned on them. I let them know, look, you two, your mother did so much for us to go on this trip. And this is how you're behaving? How do you think that makes her feel? I got to be honest with you, it was kind of fun watching how guilty they became because their faces just fell and went, we're sorry. I said, don't tell me you're sorry. You better tell Debbie Debbie, you better tell your mom when she comes back. See, I think that same circumstance is what's going on when we squabble as Christians. The Romans were fighting over meat. These days, when you tell somebody you're not a real Christian because you vote Democrat, really? We're taking what Jesus did for that. We're taking somebody that Jesus gave his life for and saying, nope, 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 nope. Jesus may accept you, but I don't. Don't think that sets well with God. We're going to talk more about this next time. Till then, have a great day.